Welcome, everybody. This is the House Agriculture and Forestry Committee streaming live on YouTube. We have several guests today, and we're going to start off. Of course, we are focusing on COVID-19 response, and we have been hearing from our dairy farmers and how sort of desperate things are becoming. We asked E.B. Flory from the Agency of Ag, Food and Markets to come and chat with us. We'd love a bit of an update, E.B., but we wanted you to answer a question. We had a question from Representative Sharon Fagard regarding what would a conventional dairy farm or even an organic one need to do in order to sell their own milk. Let's say they purchased a pasteurizer and they wanted to sell their own milk directly to the public. What would they need to do to comply? And what are sort of the guidelines? What determines what they need to do? And thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you all for having me. It's nice to see you all it's a different environment, but it's still nice to see all of you.
Thanks.
So first and foremost, if any of our dairy farmers are thinking about trying to set up and be able to process any product, whether it's fluid milk or cheese or any yogurt, what have you, they need to call our office. And that's 802-828-2433, and you'll be transferred to my line and we can have a discussion to figure out what the actual situation is, what the setup is. A few hindrances to entry is there has to be a designated separated room from the home, from the milking parlor, the barn, what have you, to actually process this product in. It has to be a sanitary room. Some facilities may have a room that they could retrofit. Some would possibly have to build some sort of building for this. So that would be the biggest hurdle to begin with. And from there, if they had a place that they could retrofit, it would be discussion. I would have staff go out, look at this place, and then get into what equipment they need and what is approved equipment. With the person that Representative Sharon had shared with us, the pasteurizer that they're using at home isn't what the federal regs from the pasteurized milk ordinance, which is what Vermont adopts by reference and statute. So that's the laws that we're held to. That pasteurizer unit does not meet federal standards whatsoever. Some of it just has to deal with milk has to be agitated. It has to have so many thermometers, recording charts, and these other things to confirm that this equipment, every drop of milk in this body that's being pasteurized has been pasteurized legally. The other thing with bottled milk is that you have to have a chiller and to chill the milk after it's been pasteurized to prevent bacteria growth in the milk that you don't want. And then lastly, you would have to have a bottler that would seal the containers appropriately. And so the pasteurized milk ordinance can be an overwhelming amount of information, and it works better and saves people money if they're looking into getting into this to have a staff member go out and be able to address what they need to do or what options are on the market. There are for bottling milk. There are vendors that are approved by the pasteurized milk ordinance with their equipment that have like an all-in-one piece that pasteurizes the milk, that chills it, and can fill and bottle it. So there are options out there on a small scale to an even larger scale. So that is a helpful piece with that. And other things that someone would have to do is they would have to be licensed with us to be a milk handler, which is something that we can handle fairly efficiently. And then depending on the farm, they may have to be rated, which is something that does not cost the farmer any money. This is something that we we do, and it has to deal with what product they're making. And if it's a grade A product like fluid milk, the farm would have to be rated to meet grade A standards. Since the COVID-19 outbreak, we had a cheesemaker that had excess milk. They lost their market overnight. They contacted another small milk bottler in the state that said they would take their milk, and they called me on a Saturday. I had someone there on Sunday doing a rating on their farm and getting everything ready. So Monday morning, the milk was picked up, no milk was dumped. So those are things that we want to work to help and keep our farmers from having to dump milk in any way that we can. We had another farm that was selling milk to a small cheese producer. Cheese producer lost their market, and the farm was looking for a way to bottle or process their own milk. They needed to act immediately. So we asked them to call a few processing plants that were in their area that have down days, and one of the processors is allowing them to make butter in their facility. So that was a situation where the farm didn't have a facility, they needed to move quickly, and we were able to work with them, get them trained, up and running, and they're making butter right now and not having to dump milk. So it's best for them to call us because there are some efficiency workarounds, but some of it just depends on what they're looking to do, where their location is, and resources.
Great, Evie. Thanks so much. That's really helpful. Could you, just for people who might not know, can you talk a little bit about what just for a few minutes about what the pasteurized milk ordinance is? You mentioned it earlier, but thanks.
The pasteurized milk ordinance, it's one of the oldest food safety regulatory documents in our nation. It's been around since right around after the Great Depression, and it really has picked up steam in the 1950s, and it has evolved on. And it is the federal national guidance for all dairy farms and manufacturers in the United States. Also, for people importing dairy products into the United States, they have to meet these standards. And the reason why Vermont adheres and adopts the PMO as our federal regulatory guidance is when you adhere to it, it makes all of your dairy products eligible to be sold in and out of state. And that's a huge deal for Vermont because so much of our milk goes out of state and is consumed out of state. So I would say abbreviated, the pasteurized milk ordinance is the dairy Bible of food safety. So
great, thanks. Are there questions for EB at this point? I think Vicky, okay, Sharon has her hand up. Yes, Sharon, and then Vicky.
Thank you. So I'm wondering if there is a kind of a third way in this. If somebody, you know, I'm guessing, I'm curious to know what are the necessary steps. So we've heard about selling pasteurized milk. What are the necessary practices and approval steps required to sell raw milk? Like, do you also have to have a separate sanitary room and things like that? Because I'm wondering if it is significantly easier to meet those standards if there's a third way that might be to offer milk for sale and follow the raw milk standards, even though it's and you said that the pasteurizer didn't meet federal standards because it didn't have an agitator and or a chiller, so those things have, so the chilling has to be done afterwards, and you can't stand there and shake it, so there's no agitation happening.
Yeah. There's a few other things that are missing on that pasteurizer as well that needs to meet federal standards, which is why we encourage people to call us so we can keep them from possibly spending money on where it's not needed. So for raw milk statute, the only thing that someone can sell is raw milk. They can't turn it into cheese or other value-added products. So it's just fluid milk. The entry into selling raw milk, if people haven't done that before, I would say the greatest hurdle is just making sure that their entire herd is up to date on rabies vaccinations and has a TB and brucellosis test. That's probably like the most time-consuming hurdle involved with that. We've had a few farms contact us to go to being a tier 1 raw milk producer. We've had a few that have requested to be tier 2, and we've been able to accommodate those requests and get people up and running. And we have had a few dairy farms that have decided to start selling raw milk, and they called the office. We got someone to be able to go by to confirm like where they are bottling, making sure that everything is clean and sanitary, and the room and restrictions and things like that are very different for meeting just the Vermont raw milk standard. Right now, the biggest comments that we're hearing really to sell raw milk as a tier 1, people have to come to your farm to purchase it. To sell as a tier 2, you can either do home deliveries or sell at a farmer's market, which with things that are going on right now with farmers markets not being allowed, there have been some tier 2 people concerned about how long will this continue and options with that.
So are the, I'm sorry, I'm trying to talk and write. So are the standards for the sanitary room higher or lower for raw milk sales?
It's lower.
It's lower. So, all right. So I think I will mute myself for a little bit and give Vicki a chance, and thank you.
Vicki, you had your hand up, but now it's down. Do you still have a question?
Not really. Sharon brought it up, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. So that we are just at about the end of our time with EB, but we can go over a little bit. Sharon, do you have some additional questions at this point?
I do. So you said that in order to sell raw milk, each cow needs to have up-to-date rabies vaccinations and to have been tested for TB and brucellosis.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is that a test that would be done on individual cows or on a batch of milk?
Individual cows, and it has
Okay.
to be done by a veterinarian, a
Okay.
licensed veterinarian.
And is this something that those who sell pasteurized milk are not having to do? Is that something that would be kind of unusual that a dairy farm would not likely to already have in place?
That's correct. Because the milk from our majority of our dairy farms in Vermont, it's being pasteurized or it's being aged into other products and things like that. They are not required for that testing because the means of processing remove potential contaminants. Raw fluid milk from the animal chilled, there's no safeguard from those potential contaminants in the milk, which is why the TB and brucellosis testing are required, and then the rabies vaccination. So
Okay.
most people don't remember what TB or brucellosis can do to you as a human if you ingest it, but it is very bad. It's very bad. There was a case in New Jersey last year where a woman, her pregnancy was aborted from drinking raw milk that had brucellosis in it, and it can be fatal. So they are bad. If you survive this sort of contamination, it can have long-lasting health effects. So it is a serious concern, which is why I believe the legislature put those requirements in place to have some safeguards for those that want access to the raw milk.
All right. Thank you so much, EB. I feel much better informed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great, thanks, EB. And now Vicki has her hand back up. So Vicki.
This, I'm sorry, this is just a quick question, EB.
Yep.
You just said in one of your statements was that raw milk standards were not as high as when you pasteurize milk. Is that what you said?
Yes, ma'am.
Because, oh, I'm okay. I'm just a little confused because I thought the bacteria count had to be lower in raw milk than regular.
Yep, that's correct. So the actual testing that's required, which testing is only required for people that are the tier 2s, there is a stricter bacterial count testing. What I meant by the regulations being more lax has to do with the actual farm setup, the milking system where they're bottling and those things. It's not meeting the grade A PMO standards. And again, I think part of why the actual bacterial testing for the tier 2 producers is stricter is because we're trying to find data or proof that despite they're only inspected yearly, not every 6 months like our dairies, and they're not meeting grade A standards, that we need something to stand on that this is safe for those that are buying it. So,
Okay, thank you.
yes, ma'am.
All right. Do we have any more questions for EB? All right, EB, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been really
Absolutely.
helpful.
I hope y'all have a good day.
Yes, thanks so much. And you feel free to stay with us, or probably you're going to want to leave the meeting. Take good care and stay well.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, thank you. So now we're going to turn to another subject. Ellen Kaler and I spoke over the weekend, and something that I had been thinking of, this is just totally kismet in a way, but something that I had been thinking about was the availability of food. Feeling like Vermont farmers are even more important to us than ever. Ellen called, and by the way, Ellen, just so I don't forget to tell you this, the Council of State Governments has canceled its annual meeting, which was to be in New Hampshire, but they are talking about doing a webinar, and my co-chair, Senator Judy Schwenk from Pennsylvania, came up with the same idea that I did for a webinar, and it has to do exactly with what we were talking about yesterday. So this has to do with the food system and the supply chain, and Ellen has seen some cracks appearing in this, and I thought it would be really helpful for us to hear about this, because this is the kind of thing that could potentially happen in any other natural disaster or climate change. So Ellen, thank you so much for being willing to join us today and to chat with us about this issue. And I love the picture behind you of the barns. Perfect setting.
Thank you. Yeah, that was my great grandparents' farm in Western New York, and it was they raised did a lot of cabbage and pickles, and would go by horse and cart down to downtown Buffalo with their wares. But that was the last that farming was done in my family, so quite a long time ago.
Wow.
But I always really loved the picture, and the frame is actually of barnwood from the barn, so it has a lot of sentimental value to me.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you for the opportunity. Nice to see you all. I was just out for a walk this morning with my wife and commenting like, wow, I really didn't anticipate not spending very much time at the legislature this year. So it's lovely to see you in this way if we can't be all in one space. So as Carolyn said, myself and some of my counterparts have been thinking about this question of emergency preparedness from a food security angle, from the standpoint of, we think about how, especially since Tropical Storm Irene and Hurricane Sandy and such in the Northeast, we've been doing an amazing job at doing more emergency preparedness for big storm events, increasing culvert sizes, thinking about the electric grid, preparing for storm surges on the coasts, those kinds of things have been, we've really learned a lot about how to prepare for those kinds of events. But what we haven't done yet, and we've done some initial scanning of the 6 New England states, the emergency preparedness community has not looked at the question of, can we feed people for during emergencies, especially extended emergencies? And in particular, if there are food supply chain disruptions. So for instance, during short-term, like we had Tropical Storm Irene here, neighbors were feeding neighbors for the days or the week or two that we couldn't get roads open because of washed out bridges. And the Red Cross can set up emergency feeding units, and the food bank can jump into action and can mobilize some food to get to food shelves. And they did some airdrops with food in certain communities that were totally cut off because of washed out roads and bridges, for instance. But that was for a few weeks. And I think what we're experiencing now with COVID-19 and some of the stories that have been coming out over the last week and a half about some more significant food supply chain disruptions nationally point to this issue that many of us have seen for many years, but like everything's just much more visible now. And so for instance, we're hearing about how there's dumping of milk, but yet there's stores that are limiting dairy purchasing, and a lot of dairy cases are running low on supplies. We are hearing about meat slaughter facilities in Pennsylvania and also now South Dakota that are having to shut down for 2 to 4 weeks because some of their workers have tested positive for COVID-19. We're seeing how produce growers, for instance, that had been selling to restaurants and institutions have, in some cases, they've been able to pivot well, and they're selling direct off the farm, and many are actually doing quite well. But for those that are wanting to try to unload even more product into grocery store supply chains, they're finding that that's quite difficult because the way in which things have evolved over the last 50 or so years in this country has been to consolidate the food supply chain. It's now owned by fewer and fewer mega corporations that have extremely well-tuned, highly tuned logistics and warehousing systems that very efficiently move large quantities of food, which in an inexpensive way that has kept prices of food artificially low. Because we have this cheap food policy in the United States that we all want cheap food. So the structural problem with this, of course, is while on one hand it's efficient and it moves a lot of food or a lot of processed food around the country very quickly, when there is a major disruption, then there's no resiliency built into that system. There's no redundancy. There's no ability to pivot quickly. So as a result, for instance, we're seeing growers in Florida having to plow under totally edible food because they can't get it into the marketplace. So these are the things that I think they've always been there, but they're much more visible now. And so the opportunity is the sort of silver lining of all of this that we're going through is that we really actually have a once in a lifetime or once in a generation opportunity to address these structural problems with our food system and really think about how could we really shift our orientation away from a national or global supply chains for everything to a more regionalized approach for the core necessities so that more of what basic foods we need in New England by New Englanders is produced in New England. And then we supplement, we can get our bananas and our oranges and our coffee, but we can get most of our meat, all of our vegetables, most of our fruit, most of our legumes grown right here in New England. And how would we actually do that? What would be required from a land-based perspective, how many more additional acres would need to come under production? How many more farmers would we need? How much more infrastructure from a processing plant perspective? What types of processing plants? What kinds of storage, both freezer as well as cold storage and cooler storage? How, what scale would be needed? What would the distribution system need to look like? All of those questions you can start to unpack if you change the frame of reference from, oh, we'll just let big corporate America figure it out for us, to like, okay, how do we actually take charge of our regional food system and work collaboratively across the 6 New England states? Maybe we can loop in New York, maybe if we feel like it. And actually really make a serious investment in building out a regional food supply chain. And that would require investment, just like we've invested in culverts and in improved bridges and things for other types of natural disaster emergency planning. We would need to make these kinds of investments in our food system. And so just to say that there's a group of us across New England who are starting to think about this very seriously, my counterparts in the other 5 New England states, as well as a regional group called Food Solutions New England. And interestingly enough, as we've been talking about this for the last 6-9 months, because of this particular crisis, a whole bunch of other people are all coming to the same conclusion at the same time, which is very good, because if we can get organized and set up a communications infrastructure, we can actually empower a lot more people to put plans in place and get things to happen at the community scale, at least, which could not only help us with what's going on right now with emergency feeding programs, but then sets us up for longer term structural change and engages people to be involved with that. So I sent along to Linda a 2-pager document. I actually had given a speech in Boston at the American Farmland Trust, had a big conference for the day down in Boston, and 200 people were there, and I had given this speech, although I did what I sent you, I modified and shortened up a little bit and added in COVID, the pandemic, because I was talking all about climate change and needing to prepare for climate emergencies with natural disasters, rising sea levels, climate migration because of people leaving the coast to move more inland, and what were we going to do to protect the land base, those kinds of things. And then, of course, had I been more prescient, I should have included COVID-19 right then and there in mid-February, because really we knew it was coming. So we thought that we were going to have more time to prepare for these changes because of climate change, like over the next 5 years. And then, of course, we get slammed with COVID-19, and it means that we have to move much more quickly to address these issues. So I would encourage you to take a look at the 2-pager that I sent. If you have any questions about this concept, I'm happy to answer them and talk a little bit more about that.
Thanks. Thanks, Ellen. I was just actually looking for our webpage to see that was up. Who all is interested in talking about this from other states? Who have you been having conversations with?
Well, we're just starting to have the conversations, but there's basically equivalents to Vermont Farm to Plate in the other New England states. They're not as well funded or well staffed as we are, but they do exist. And then part of the reason why I gave this speech at this conference was because there were going to be all the other key, at least nonprofit and government like people there. So Healthcare Without Harm, American Farmland Trust, Farm to Institution New England, as well as there were 5 out of the 6 commissioners from the region that were present. A lot of folks, financing people like Coastal Enterprises out of Maine was there. So it was a big forum to sort of test this idea. And we had within 5 minutes, we had 56 people that signed up that wanted to have follow-up, and that we didn't even cover the whole room because we like literally ran out of time to collect. So this is something that is going to have serious legs. My biggest concern is getting it structured and organized in a way that we can accommodate and organize things in a way that people can plug in. What we're also currently doing is reviewing. I've got Becca Warren from Vital Communities, who's been helping us with our Farm to Plate 2.0 process. I had a little bit of money to be able to pay her. She's starting to take a look at each of the 6 New England states. What are their emergency preparedness documents? And do they include food security type language in them? So we want to catalog all of the official sort of policy docs that relate to resilience planning, climate action planning, emergency management, preparedness planning, whatever the language is that are used in the different 6 states. Collect all of that and then assess them to see, are there logical places to be then working with the entities who are responsible for drafting these documents to include food security preparedness planning into those documents. Because our feeling is if we can get into those documents, then it will force them to actually start thinking about how to do the planning.
Thanks, Ellen. I just got a message that my internet connection's unstable. So if you lose me at some point, Rodney, you can take over as co-host. But until that happens, I'm still on board here. I just wanted to give you a heads up.
Yeah.
You know, years ago when I was first chair of House Ag, and it was House Agriculture back then, I asked Erin Buckwalter, who was an intern at, maybe she interned for me, I can't remember, but now she's at NOFA, of course, we all know Erin. I asked her to do a kind of a paper on an inventory of available land in the state. So land that, like over in the western part of the state, a lot of the land has kind of gone back to scrub and what have you, and how many acres, and I'm not going to remember the details, but that was one document that I held on to. So I'm going to dig through all my debris pile here and see if I can find that, because I think it would be interesting to know how much land we actually have available, and would it be suitable to grow the things that we need. And
Yeah.
so Ellen, do you, like, I bake my own bread. So, and I've got about 10 pounds of flour left. Every time I go to Hannaford, there's still bare shelves with the flour. I've heard where I can find some, but at any rate, I almost feel like it's black market, black market flour here. So do we have an idea of, or is this part of the process that you're talking about, doing an inventory on what would be needed to keep us all going?
Yeah, definitely part of the process. We do have, there are now much better data layers of being able to see where there is available land. For instance, the American Farmland Trust actually just came out with a really good report. I'll send you the link to it so Linda can post it, that looked at this very question, and also from the lens of, are there critical pieces of land across New England that we need to prioritize preserving for agricultural use because they are under threat of development? And they did some really interesting new analysis to take a look at where, for instance, there might be residential developments where they hold back some amount of land that theoretically could be used for agricultural use. But what they found is, over doing a time sequence of those parcels, is that one, they don't end up going into agriculture, or they come out of agriculture if they were already in it. And it's partly because of access, of not being able to get equipment in, of not, they're not big enough to really support an actual operation. It's too close to housing, so people don't want the manure and all those other kinds of issues that we know about. So it does suggest that we are going to have to take a look at some of our land use priorities some more. We definitely are going to need to accelerate the preservation of prime ag land for prime ag for ag production. I know that the Land Trust, for instance, is currently raising a $15 million fund to try to accelerate the rate at which they can do farmland purchasing and then redeployment to the next generation of farms with their farmland access program, for instance. But I do know that Nick has thought that he could basically use about $50 million to secure a bunch of land over the next 5 to 10 years because of just the succession issues coming up, of there not being a next generation operator to take over, for instance. So I will say that, go ahead.
Ellen, you just dropped out briefly when you said who was raising that 15, or it was either 50 or 15 million?
15 million by the Vermont Land Trust
Okay,
to basically accelerate and expand their farmland access program. But Nick did think that about 50 million was really what was needed to be able to really do it at the scale that is required because of the succession issues going on. I will say also that back in 2014, there was some initial analysis done by a group called Food Solutions New England, which I've been part of from the beginning. And there was a team of researchers that did ask this very question of what percentage of food could we actually produce and of what types across the 6 New England states. And obviously it's Maine and Vermont are the largest producer states and somewhat in Western Mass. And then you have large pockets of eaters, Boston, Connecticut, Rhode Island, for instance. So what they did was they ran some basic analysis of how much, and they basically determined we could produce all of our produce. If we moved to grass-based animal agriculture, we could basically feed ourselves with a reduced meat diet, but we could actually do it in a grass-based way. Obviously, we would still maintain all of our dairy needs. We could do like some of our legumes, some grains, but not a lot of grains because the climate is just not as conducive. The overall land structure is not as conducive for that. We could do a lot of our fruit because of orchards and such. And what they determined was that in order to do this, to get to 50% regional production for regional consumption, we would need collectively to bring about 2 million acres additionally into production across the 6 states. Now, obviously, a lot of that would be Vermont and a lot of it would be in Maine, in Aroostook County in particular. And
you
what
say
it
2 million?
2 million.
And who did this assessment?
This was done by a group of researchers on contract with Food Solutions New England. I can send you the document as well if you're interested.
Yes.
Basically, though, it provides a theoretical, like, this is possible. It's aspirational, it's theoretical.
Yeah.
What we're proposing to do over the next year and a half, assuming we can raise the funding for it, is to actually take that, okay, well, where exactly would that 2 million acres come from? How much in Vermont? How much in Maine? How much in Massachusetts? How much New Hampshire? And then say, okay, so let's just take the example of Vermont. Let's just say we need to bring 750,000 additional acres online, just making this up. Okay, how many farms at what scale? What would it need to produce? How do we ramp up existing produce production? How could we ramp up existing livestock and grass-based livestock? How could we shore up the dairy industry, again, to really serve the regional marketplace and less about, say, powder global markets as a way of really increasing the value gone back to farmers, those kinds of things. So we want to do that analysis.
Ellen, that sounds really fantastic. I'm sorry to interrupt. Tom Bach has his hand up. Tom, you have to unmute yourself. I'm making everybody practice.
Well, Ella, I'm just curious in my mind, is the central part of your proposal the distribution system or this land use system?
It's both, because we can't, first we need the product, right? And then, and simultaneously, we need to be figuring out the distribution system that allows that product to get to the various markets. So this has to be at all levels, all at once. Because we also need to have processing capacity for, light processing for longer term freezer storage, those kinds of things.
Just playing the devil's advocate here. Let's say public and private investment does the distribution system. Somehow we put aside this 2 million acres of land. Let's say these things happen. And let's say we're growing zucchini, broccoli, and grass-fed hamburger. Somebody from Iowa shows up with burger. Somebody from Georgia shows up with zucchini. We can't stop them. They're still going to be able to sell in this market.
Yeah.
And they're going to be competing with that system you're creating. And I don't know, how do you feel about that? I mean, do you feel it can compete?
Well, this is a monumental shift in the way that we think about where our food comes from. What I don't see how this could fully happen without a couple of additional things that I hadn't yet talked about, which is consumer demand and consumer education about a preference to be sourcing more of their food local for more of the year. So that's a piece of it. And then secondly, it's where are the national subsidies going? So right now, the bulk of our taxpayer dollars paid for subsidies go to the Midwest, to corn, soy, and wheat production, and large industrial scale farms, as well as to other large operations like large produce growers and large ranchers and such. And so there would need to be a larger national conversation about, could we regionalize the food system everywhere so that the Southeast had their region and the North and the Southwest had their region. And again, it's not to say that we create these islands where there isn't interstate trade, but it's what percentage increase could we get to? So what I talked about, like for instance, theoretically, we could produce all of our produce. That's a theoretical, like we have the climate. If we had more year-round growing based on the population, technically speaking, we could produce that. That's not to say we would, right? That's not to say that, we might try to get to 40% of our produce needs grown within New England. And because of what you said, like we know there's going to be product coming in from other parts of the country at different growing seasons. We'd like to have everything available to us all year round now. So there's just going to be some limitations. But to me, what was interesting is just trying to think about the theoretical, and then how would you actually implement at least some of it across the region. And that's the conversation that we're just starting to have. And your questions are good ones, and there's thousands of more questions to try to do this.
Which thanks, Tom. If you could put your hand down, I'd appreciate it. I'm trying to get everybody on board here so we can eventually go on the floor of the House and remember to remove. So take down our hands. So I have three people with their hands up: Vicky, John Bartholomew, and then John O'Brien. So Vicky, you're speaking of 1,000 questions. Vicky, there you are.
There we go. Okay, sorry. Speaking of learning how to use this and thousands of questions, Ellen, this is so amazing. Once you open your mind up to this thinking, all those questions are coming out. And so one thought and question I have refers to Carolyn and her flour situation. A friend of mine just orders King Arthur flour regularly as a normal thing. Whereas now I'm starting to think more of, well, should I be buying some things and do it online when my stores are empty? So this is opening up the question of distribution, and maybe we're looking at a whole new future of a different type, like more sales online, or we have Green Mountain Food Direct where our town's going to start ordering bulk foods and distributing. So where in the conversation have you gone down that path yet?
Well, I mean, again, we're just starting to noodle on this a little bit, and you know, part of the work that we've been doing through Farm to Plate over the last several years, by having, you may remember Annie Harlow testified last year's annual report. She's our retail store trainer, so she's been working with a lot of independent grocery stores and the co-ops and trying to support them in expanding their sourcing of local. In the process, that opens up the question of like, okay, so if you want to source more local into your independent grocery store, how do you actually get that food? Like who are the distributors that will source, that will buy in local food? And then how do you identify it on their sales lists? And then how do you work with both the distributor as well as maybe doing direct store buys from producers in your region, right in your local area? So these are all big questions, and we've been having conversations with the distributors like Upper Valley Produce and AG New England and Reinhardt and such to talk about what would it take for them to source in more local and then promote it. Because it's one thing to have it on your sales sheets. It's another thing for the stores to actually know that it's there. If you don't mark it as local, how do you know it's local? And if you have stores that really want to be buying more local, they need to learn that they need to ask for it. So there is such a learning that needs to happen across the entire supply chain, because we've gotten so used to the sort of anonymity of everything for so long, and how things just move and you don't pay attention to where it comes from, and you just, you know, oh, I want that, I get it, kind of a thing. And so what we're saying is we need to really rethink that. And I think one of the things that's happening right now that's amazing to be watching is that the current understanding is CSA share sign up is through the roof. Everybody is going out and so many people are signing up for CSAs, and they hadn't for years. And interest in growing their own food. I mean, High Mowing Seeds had 10 positions open because they couldn't fill seed orders. They had a 1 week sales jump of 300% for their seeds a couple weeks ago. So like Vermonters anyways are like, oh my gosh, there's not food on the shelves. I need to grow it. I need to buy meat from my local farm down the road. I need to do this. I need to do that. Taking more control. The question is this going to be maintainable post-COVID-19? If COVID-19 does what they anticipate of a lot of like little bumps until everybody gets vaccinated, then the possibility is that this could be an 18 to 24 month situation, which means we have a greater chance of actually transforming things that will last, because we will have more time to get more in place that people then get used to the new way, which then makes it easier for them to maintain going forward. So I do think that there will be more online, but I think the big question is, you know, with online is just then you have the issues around climate change with a lot more trucks on the road going, you know, up certain roads, and just the inefficiency of doing individual home delivery drop off of, you know, in a big way, if it were to really scale, you know, as opposed to, there's definitely efficiency of having stores and people come to the stores.
Thanks, Ellen. John Bartholomew.
I had to find my mute. Couple of things. One, you mentioned regional growing of food, and I'm just wondering how that might play out in terms of food cost. You're still going to have large farms in the east, I mean in the west, that would have economy of scale and could probably produce food a lot more cheaply. And you might also have regions of the country where people just demand better food and are willing to pay for it, but you still have people living in those areas who can't. So I'm wondering if we went down that path, we would end up with a situation kind of like housing. Well, where you want to live in Vermont because the houses are too expensive, or wow, food is really expensive there, that regional food. Live in Iowa where you can get food a lot more cheaply. I also, well, I had a different comment, but I don't know if you have any response to that. I'm just concerned about if we were to actually be successful in that, would regional food prices be just like housing?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really important question. And to a certain extent, that was a bit of what Tom's question was about as well. It's definitely, our cost of production here in the Northeast is definitely higher because our farms are smaller. So as you say, economies of scale. But I think that, so some of this is again about consumer education and awareness. Some of it is about where are our subsidies going. I mean, for instance, instead of everything going to corn, wheat, and soy in the Midwest, if you have a certain pot of US taxpayer subsidy dollars going to agricultural production, could that be changed so that a percentage went to the Northeast to facilitate regional food production as a way of trying to keep some of the prices down because of the subsidies? We don't know if that's possible. You know, it would take a huge lift. And that's where I said there's a component of this that has a national dependence to it, and that we can't just completely do this all on our own in New England without understanding how the overall national supply chain works. And again, that's another reason why it wouldn't be about like we're not talking about going 100% local, or, you know, even getting to 50% local would be a huge undertaking. So I think what we're trying to figure out is, we set the target back in 2010 of getting from 5% to 10%, and we actually got to 14% by the end of 2017. You know, what would it look like if we got to say 30% by 2030, or 2035? Could we get, what would that take? And I think that's really the nature of the conversation. And your question about price is a really important one, because there are so many people in New England who are very price sensitive from a shopping standpoint, because they have fixed incomes, they have low incomes. There's just certain realities that we're going to have to deal with to make sure that food is accessible to everyone, and we're not creating this elitist food situation. But part of this is also just us as consumers thinking about, where do we want to spend our money? There are certain choices that I make as a consumer of things I'm not going to buy because I want to have more disposable income to spend on the food that I choose. So there are those household choices that are going to come into play as well.
John, did you have a follow-up?
Well, just kind of on a separate thing, you commented on the people buying a lot of seeds, and I'm not viewing that very favorably right now, particularly because we're having trouble getting seeds. And I'm thinking that this is just hoarding. I'm not convinced this is really a good sign, because like I say, I think that there's probably as much chance as those seeds getting in the ground as the toilet paper will be used in derrieres.
You very well may be right, especially if people are not used to gardening. They may be like, oh, I need 5 pea packets when they only really need 1. I mean, that absolutely could be going on. I mean, time will tell once people
Or maybe they won't plant at all. Oh, but I got to do this. But
yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
I'm being a pessimist. I'm sorry.
I don't know. Maybe
it's okay.
Maybe you should take a job up at High Mowing, John. All right, John O'Brien has his hand up. Sort of. It says lower hand, but the hand there.
It's still been up. Ellen, I don't know if this is even going to turn into a question, but what strikes me about this conversation is it's almost like we're back to non-emergency preparedness in everything you've been doing with Food to Plate about, producing more local food for more local shoppers, or regional food for regional shoppers. Doesn't even have to do so much with an emergency. it's just where we want to go. I mean, it makes sense economically for communities and landscapes. On the other side, then, have you had conversations about, what happens with a tropical storm Irene to our farms? If we're at 50%, all of a sudden we're down to 25%. Or if we get a Fukushima type situation, or like this weekend where you have a plague plus tornadoes, or we get, Hurricane Sandy plus COVID, what happens then to our food?
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. Those are really good questions, and they're completely out of our control. But, I would say that if we had more local food that was staying within the region, I think that we could pivot more quickly to move food around within the region. Like, there's questions going on right now about how is food actually moving either from Vermont to, say, the southern part of New England? Like, are there markets opening up because their markets are there? They have more shelves that are empty because of higher populations. Like, we just don't even know at this point because the system is so fragmented. The other thing that I would say to your question is that it's about resiliency and working with more of an ecosystem mindset. If everything is concentrated, that's a real vulnerability. And if we had more distributed, more diverse scales, markets, distributors in all these different areas, then if one part goes down because of a natural disaster, there's more resiliency and capacity around it to then meet that need of what went down. I think that what is still, though, very challenging is when you have this level of pandemic where every single state is impacted, whereas natural disasters tends to be like one state or a couple of states at a time. And so you have a little bit more ability to pivot quickly to meet emergency needs. I do think, though, on your question of emergency needs, is we need to simultaneously be putting in place actual emergency feeding plans that are more robust, more detailed, and can go into place even more quickly. It's been amazing to watch the food bank and the work that Benji Adler and his team are doing around meal preparation for the homeless and for the food bank, food shelves. Like, it's unbelievable how quickly things are being taken care of. Just, even just like the couple of day pivot for schools to start preparing and delivering meals for kids twice a day. That's amazing for us. And we can do that in Vermont because we have this small, tight-knit communities. We've invested in our relationships and farm to plate over the last 10 years. We're really seeing the benefit of the level of investment that we've made in the networks that we've built and the relationships that we've invested in, because people are able to move much more quickly to address needs than we would have 10 years ago. But to sort of flip back to your point around the sort of vulnerability of a supply chain, if you guys were to take a look at that, I forgot to mention this, that 2-page speech that I sent over, the PDF, the third page has these two visuals of the United States. And this was from research that was done out of University of Illinois. Yeah, Carolyn's holding it up. And it's fascinating because what they did was they analyzed what's called the commodity flow survey, which are all the products that go on ships and rail and trucks, and how food is moved around within the United States. And the Agency of Transportation does this research every 5 years. So they analyzed the 2012 data. So there's now 2017 data they could add in, but they basically showed how food moves in the United States. And if you take a look at that map of the United States, you will see, like, take a look at New England. There's not nearly the number of lines, which really shows, and everything is through the I-95 corridor. So you start to have major disruptions of the food supply chain there, and we're basically cut off, is what that tells me, right? And the other,
Ellen,
yeah.
Having traveled that, we're not going to Maryland this year, but having traveled that, there are areas of the, I suppose it was constructed as part of the national defense. But there are places in Baltimore where you're pretty low down, you know, close to water. So I don't know. I think you make a really good point. If there was some kind of interruption or a flood or what have you, we would
Right.
be out of luck.
Yeah, and that's where this resiliency planning comes in, you know, for redundancy. And again, it's not to get to 100% production for consumption, but it's like a much larger percentage than what we currently have. And to figure out the processing and the distribution and the retail within the region so that we are just have a more diverse supply chain set up so that we're not so dependent on just a few mega corporations to move all the food around. Like Hannaford's, like Bernie Sanders called up Hannaford's and was really trying to put pressure on them because their main headquarters is in Maine to get more local Vermont and regional food. And they're trying, but their logistics and their warehousing and their trucking routes, they are struggling. And they're of the three main regional stores, they are the ones that are most interested in having a robust local program. And they are struggling to figure out how to get more local product into their stores, even though they want to. So to me, that's just a major signal that the system we've built for the purpose of high efficiency, lowest cost has made us very vulnerable. And what we need to do is to rethink and restructure our and regionalize our food system over the next 15 years in a more significant way.
I see that Sharon's hand is up, but Ellen, do you know what the major obstacle for Hannaford sourcing more local food is?
I don't, but I do know, I don't know in total, but one aspect is around food safety and whether farms are GAP certified.
Okay.
Carolyn,
Yes.
just a follow-up for Ellen and the committee, a quick historical one. I just wonder, thinking of the stay-at-home thing with COVID, if there were any parallels, thinking back to where you couldn't leave your house with, you know, it must go back to sort of Cold War planning or Vermont Yankee melting down as far as don't leave your house. And I wonder what those plans look like if they were state or federal, but I assume, you know, we were heading in the wrong direction at that point as far as it was much, you know, we're going towards a national sourcing of food, not a regional resiliency. Does anybody remember? Carolyn, you probably would, about Vermont Yankee meltdown.
So honestly, all I remember about Vermont Yankee was a basic, yeah, if something happens, you need to get the heck out of Dodge. And you know, which my husband refused to do. He said, I'm not leaving. We have animals here. We have to feed them. And there was no way we're going to load them all onto one truck, right? So I don't remember anything, although, you know, somebody like Jim Matteau, who was part of that emergency planning for, Jim was the former executive director of Wyndham Regional Planning Commission. There might have been something about food, but honestly, I don't remember it. So, Ellen, I don't know if you have any idea.
I don't, but I mean, those are the kind of things we probably should be dusting off and taking a look at. I don't know whether they planned around food or not.
Yeah.
You know, or maybe it was from the national commodity warehouses where they have you know, the emergency backup supplies of cheese and butter and powdered milk and those kinds of things, but you can't survive on that for very long.
Well, butter and cheese maybe, but
so I don't know what they're
yeah.
So you know, one of the things that's different now that I'm actually really quite excited about, and my team is, you know, when we did the Farm to Plate 1.0 plan, as I mentioned, we only set one target, the getting from 5% to 10% local consumption. And we said we wanted to have more jobs, but we didn't set a target. We just sort of said, this is what we think is possible if we can expand, we can double our local consumption, right? And 10 years ago, the community was not ready for targets of saying, how much produce production do we want? How much livestock production do we want? How much dairy production do we want? Like with the goal of feeding a greater percentage of our, meeting a greater percentage of our food needs more locally or regionally. And what I'm sensing now, and this is showing up across the New England states, is people are actually more open to setting targets now. They're actually open to having that conversation. And last year's annual Farm to Plate annual gathering, for instance, Mark Cannella had a breakout session. Mark works for UVM Extension. And he was just toying with this notion of, okay, we keep seeing this downward slide of dairy. Well, what's going to replace dairy? And so, and not in like $100,000 levels, but what could be the next 25 or the next 50 million food category that we could be, with focus and infrastructure and investment, we could be expanding. You know, maple is already 50 million plus, but produce is like 25 or 30 million. What would it take to get that to be 50 million? Apples and other produce, you know, have been on a decline. How do we bring them back? What's the, how do we get grass-fed livestock to be, say, 25 million in sales? So like, what would that actually take? How much land, how many farmers, how many animals, how much actual product, how many acres, and to really build that out. And what I'm sensing is a real interest in actually doing that work now. And so that is going to be over the next couple of years where I'm going to be trying to raise additional funding to be able to get that work done, and not just do it in Vermont, but do it in all 6 New England states.
Fantastic. So Sharon's been very patient. Sharon's hand is up, and then we'll go to Rodney after Sharon. Sharon?
Thank you. So this entire conversation and this entire situation with COVID and watching some of these plants owned by large corporations shut down because workers have been infected and some have died, it makes me think of more resilient and sustainable energy grid. You know, the further, and there's so many similarities, because if there's a breakdown and you're on a grid that's relying on, babe, I am off mute, thanks, that you're so vulnerable to something that happens 1,000 miles away or 500 miles away, and you don't have the local ability to respond to it. You don't have the nimbleness. And also, similarly, the nutritional value of something that comes from far away, just like electricity moving from far away, you lose a lot of it. Something like 75% of electricity generated is lost during transport between the generator and the end user. And so that's just, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I feel like this is a really important conversation, and that we have a lot of issues with nutrition and ignorance about nutrition, that we are in a position to help people understand better. And yes, people are a lot more aware that basic needs are actually the foundation upon which we can do everything else.
Yes. Thanks, Sharon. Want to comment, Ellen, or should I go to
No,
Rodney?
well said, well said. It stands alone.
Yeah, great. Rodney?
Gotta get unmuted here. I was just wondering on you mentioned Hannaford's trying to get more local food, and here in central Vermont, we had a family-owned grocery store called Howard's, and they used to take in a lot of local food, and then Hannaford bought them out. And at that point, Hannaford's had a regional warehouse that was in New York. So any local producer, if they wanted to get local food in, had to deliver it to New York. so that it could be shipped back to Vermont.
Right,
Is that still their practice? And
yes,
and so
that,
that's why, these small local producers can't deliver to New York.
right. And so that is absolutely a key component. And all of the regional and national chains, that is their operation. They have centralized warehouses, and food goes to that warehouse and then goes to its end place, right? So that's why what we have seen is an increase in the amount of local food that is direct store delivered, DSD, to independently owned local grocery stores. So if you're a store owner, like White's Market or any of the like Richmond Market or the Market Underhill store, those stores, they can set up relationships with local growers, local livestock meat producers, for instance, and they're buying in direct. The challenge for those stores is that if they really want to have a robust local program, they could be buying from 25, 50, 75 producers, which means that that means they have 50, 75 trucks showing up a couple times a week delivering, as opposed to one centralized distribution truck that, like Reinhardt or something like that, right? So these are the trade-offs that we have to sort out. Smaller stores don't have the kind of loading docks and don't have the storage capacity. So it can make things more difficult than just having one. We need to be doing both. We need to get local product into the larger chains, so that we can have both options. The direct store delivery option definitely delivers a higher price point for the producer than going to sell through a distributor, because the store is more willing. Well, there's just not the middle person that a distributor is with all of their overhead costs. But as a store owner, you have a challenge because you're managing that many more vendor accounts. So that's the balance that we're trying to strike.
It seemed to me too, as we talk about the future, that storage is a huge part of this. You've mentioned it several times, but storage is really big in order to put stuff away. I know Harlow's, for instance, in Westminster Paul Harlow has some pretty huge walk-in coolers. And that's the kind of thing, maybe even larger, that it would take to be able to make a regional food system work.
Yeah, or just cool, dry storage for root crops and squash and things like that, for instance, so that you can extend their ability to last throughout the whole year, for instance. There's just a lot of that kind of infrastructure that we're gonna need. And it also impacts the emergency feeding system when we do have an emergency, because, for instance, just last week, a number of us found out that there was like $100,000 worth of product that Reinhardt needed to unload because they were getting close to sell-by dates. And the question was, where should that food go, either for sale or for donation, if they couldn't sell it? And so a bunch of phone calls being made around about, like, who actually has cold storage, who has freezer storage, could we get it processed and frozen, who's going to cover the cost of the freezer space, then and how do you get it, can it get broken down really quickly by the food bank and then distributed, and what types of products, how much packaging just needs to come off of that food, like all of those questions literally were happening last week.
Yeah.
And Ellen, that we could not lose $100,000 worth of edible food.
Was it produce, like
it was
vegetables?
It was what? Primarily, but it was, because it's anything that's not shelf stable that doesn't have a long life, but some meat as well as produce.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I was looking at that this page, and this looks really interesting, and what is sort of shocking is that the bottom graphic says core counties for the US food supply. A study showed that these 9 counties, mostly 7 of them are in California, are most central to the overall structure of the food supply network. A disruption to any of these counties may have ripple effects for the food supply chain of the entire country. So one is in South Texas, one is in southwestern Tennessee, and the rest of them are in California. It's like insane, you
Yep.
know?
And
I mean,
and a lot of that is through the port of LA. So some of that is all of the shipping containers coming from overseas that go through LA County.
yeah,
And then, but it's also port where the, the base of the Central Valley where so much produce comes up from Mexico or it's produced in California. Yeah, no, it's really scary. And the place that you mentioned that's on the Mississippi River, the reason that those 2 counties are vulnerable is because the lock system on the Mississippi River have not been updated, and so there is a potential breach in the locks and the levees that if they fail, then trade up and down the Mississippi goes kaplooey.
wow.
So think about that from, all the, and, it happened last year with all the flooding in the Midwest and not being able to get crops up and down the Mississippi,
Right.
let alone get crops in the ground. I mean, and, the fires in California, I mean, this is where the risks and the vulnerability of what we have created over the last 50 years is really coming home to roost and becoming so much more visible now. I mean, it's not that it wasn't always there, but we just couldn't fully see it and appreciate the magnitude of it until now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad we're thinking about it now.
I'm pretty stoked about it. I'm excited.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I know. Yeah. No, I'm really glad that we're having the conversation. Oh, Vicki is clapping her hands. Ellen, was there more you wanted to add to this?
No, I guess sort of just stay tuned. We're in the process of trying to raise the funding needed in the region to get this work underway. And we'll be, communicating with all of the emergency preparedness folks once they get past this current crisis point and we start talking more recovery and resilience phases to figure out, okay, what were the lessons learned? What did we figure out how to put in place from an emergency standpoint this time that we want to codify and sort of get some protocols so that when this happens again, we're not reinventing things. We're like, oh yes, right, dust off that plan. This is how we do this. So that kind of work is going to be needed over the next 18 to 24 months, which will be good. And I think a lot of people are excited to and interested in helping with that. And then I would just say the other document that I sent was just, in addition to all the COVID-19 stuff, we still have all of our farm to plate work to do.
Right.
So
Right.
that's just to, so this page here on our website, we put together a task force that now meets every other week, a phone call. We put together this resource page, which links to a lot of other pages, but we just try to think about how to collect by topic area resources around COVID-19, and we're continually adding to it. So this is a good resource. A lot of great stuff on the Agency of Ag's website. There's a bunch of resources that are going up on the Farm and Forest Viability web page related to business support systems and getting support for their businesses, those kinds of things. So I encourage you to take a look at the stuff that's in here when you get a chance. And then the other document, Linda, if you could pull it up, was the Farm to Plate document of basically our work plan through the end of the calendar year. Which, when we were with you in January, we published part 1 of all those 23 briefs, whatever that was. So we're currently on track to produce another 31, I think. We've got a second batch that are in final, there we go. Part 2 is in final production, where the briefs are currently being reviewed by the agency, and then they'll go into layout and production. Our plan is still have them done by sometime in May. We're actively working on us conducting a stakeholder engagement process from May through August. A bunch of it will be by Zoom, but there are a couple of things we really need to have as full day retreats in person. So we'll have to plan those for when it's safe to do so. We still want to be able to prepare some lists of priority recommendations for the FY22 budget and your 21 legislative session, and also for working lands for funding priority for 21 fiscal 21 grant rounds, for instance. So all of that work is still underway. And then all of that will be turned into a Farm to Plate Strategic Plan 2.0 document, which will be the final document in this 18-month process. We'll deliver that to you in January. It will include the full set of all the 56 briefs. They'll be considered sort of the appendix to the plan. We will be having a prioritization of recommended action coming out of that. And then that will lead to a restructuring of the Farm to Plate network, an overhaul of the website, and all of that by this time next year. And then we still have our ongoing projects. We're going to be doing another round of radio ad buys for Rooted in Vermont to really hone in on, from a COVID-19 perspective, of really trying to get even more front and center for consumers to be buying local from their Rooted in Vermont vendors and stores, getting them into locally owned grocery stores. We continue to do training support for retail grocers and working with distributors. And then one of the other projects we have going is, we're still doing value chain work on grass-fed beef, grains. We had a great meeting before everything shut down with Vermont Creamery to talk about how to increase the number of goat farms that we're selling to them. And then one of the other things that we're working on is this local planning for food access, and we're modifying this to also include emergency preparedness planning for emergency meal feeding because of COVID-19. So working with towns who are interested in building that into their local and regional plans. So lots still happening.
We all need to eat.
Exactly.
Yeah. Do we have questions for Ellen? Ellen, I want to thank you so much. Was there anything else you would like to add?
No, just keep the faith, and it'll be good to pass whatever you can pass, and especially the technical corrections bill for ag, whatever you're calling that, with the new local food definition in it, or the updated local food definition, will be important to all of this. And anything you can do to hold the line on increased funding for working lands would be, I think, priority, because that's going to be one of the best, fastest ways to get real dollars to a number of farms and be making these kind of infrastructure investments that we really need to be making as we, grow the food system. So that's going to be really key. We don't know what's going to happen with the federal stimulus money in terms of its ability to actually get the work for farms and food businesses. We have been talking with the federal delegation and with the commissioners in other New England states about this notion of maybe some of that or all of the 9.5 billion that was in the CARES Act designated to ag and food could come to the states in a form of a block grant by formula, rather than being doled out wherever Sonny Perdue wants to dole it out to all of his friends, or going through existing grant programs, which is just really slow, bureaucratic, a lot of red tape. We'd like to see, a pot of funds that just comes to Vermont. And then because of our relationships, we can, and our knowledge of our food system, we can be figuring out how best to deploy those funds quickly to the sectors that really most need it in a thoughtful way, rather than folks in DC that have no idea what we have going on here. So I don't know, that could be a letter that you guys could whip up really fast. I know Anson put together a letter that he's circulating amongst the other ag commissioners in the Northeast to get sign on, which would basically ask that Secretary Perdue do this block grant process rather than other means. So I don't know if I mean, everything's moving really fast, so it may not be appropriate timing, but you guys could weigh in on the C4 stimulus. I know Tom Berry is currently collecting ideas for what should go into the C4 stimulus request. So if there's some specific things that you guys have been talking about, you could always reach out to Tom Berry and get him a bullet list of a couple things. There's lots of opportunity to push on that, because right now there's no money flowing. There's always money being allocated, but it's not flowing yet.
Right, right. John O'Brien has his hand up.
Thank you, Carolyn. Before Ellen leaves, and maybe I missed this earlier, was where are we at with farmers markets? I've heard now conflicting things, that the governor overruled ag and health, and then I've also, E.B. Fleury just said that they weren't open. So
Well,
Yeah, farmers markets at this point are not allowable places. They're not considered essential businesses. So farmers markets, in the way that they have functioned, cannot operate. That is a fluid situation. It may change. The agency had put forward a proposal that NOFA Vermont worked on along with agency input, which would basically spell out protocols for how they could do markets in a safe way. Our sense is that both Dr. Levine and the governor felt that it was still too risky from a public health perspective. And they, on Friday, issued as part of the guidance and clarification that was not going to be possible. I think people are still working on this. I think there's a lot of understanding that this is an important way that Vermonters access food. And I think the big question at this point is sort of the timing of when they could potentially open, and then if they are allowed to open, is it financially feasible for them to open? I was encouraging the farmers market managers to come up with what's their drop dead date by which, if they can't open by a certain date, financially, they can't open for the whole year, and to understand what that drop dead date is. So hopefully some of them are thinking through it in that way. There are lots of farmers markets happening all over New England and in DC. I got the protocols for Mount Pleasant, what they're doing in Mount Pleasant in DC with their farmers market, and I passed that along. So, it's still very fluid, but I think the primary concern is keeping people only going out to go to the grocery store, so one stop, and as a way of right now keeping all of us to stay at home. And I think that's the primary reason. But again, I think as conditions change on the ground, I think there's a large awareness that a lot of people really are upset and really want farmers markets to be able to open. So I think it's a question of when, not if, and then it's a matter of, can the markets actually manage it if the timing is later than we might want.
so this is a good segue, because next on our agenda is the issue of farmers markets. And I wrote my article about this in great part this week. I think what's most frustrating for me, and maybe all of us, we decided at the end at our last meeting that we would ask Mike O'Grady to write a letter to the governor and the Department of Health. And when Mike talked, we talked via email about this, he suggested Mike Sherling as well. So I think what's most frustrating for me about this is that there was, we did talk to the Bennington Farmers Market. They did have a set of protocols that were pretty limited in terms of person-to-person contact. They had online and telephone pre-order, they had curbside pickup. And then I understand that another farmer's market actually met. They typically meet indoors. They had their meeting, their market indoors. A whole lot of people had dropped out, so they could spread out the tables widely, and people came in. And from what I kind of get is that maybe the problem was the fact that they were each collecting their own money, and that was disturbing to the commissioner of health. So I at the beginning of this conversation, somebody said that they thought that farmers markets were going to be allowed to go forward if they were meeting, they had the protocols in place and they were meeting those requirements. But I'm wondering, Mike, I see you've turned your camera on, and I'm wondering if you have any update on this, and if you were able to put together a letter.
As to an update, I believe the guidance document issued by the Agency of Agriculture last week is still in place. It does prohibit the operation of farmers markets. It does include a statement that they are contemplating measures or methods to allow farmers markets to operate, but currently they are still prohibited. I did draft a letter for you. I sent it to Linda. I don't know if it made it onto the web page yet.
I don't see it for today. Linda, do you want to unmute yourself?
Not on the web yet, sorry.
Okay, that's okay. Yeah, I have not seen it. And I'm wondering if we want to spend a little bit of time going through it. I just want to say I appreciate the desire to maintain very limited person-to-person contact. But I also think that given the fact that there is at least one farmer's market that has been able to pull together a very strict protocol, that I'm hoping that the administration will be able to relax this as quickly as possible, because this is the time of year more than ever when farmers need income. This is when they're putting their seeds in the ground and getting ready to grow the food that we're hopefully going to eat in the next, in the next few months. So this is why I think it's important that potentially we send a letter, and hopefully it'll make a difference. And maybe they could lay out the guidelines. I don't know how extensive guidelines are for stores doing business in terms of plexiglass shields or what have you. But I've been in stores. I go shopping about once a week. And the last time I was in a shop, the cashier wasn't even wearing a face mask. So, what gives here?
I think that's one of the big challenges that a lot of folks are facing who are very pro farmers market, is that they have lived experience of going to regular grocery stores that have not put in place the level of protections that they really should be for their employees, but also keeping the people going through up and down aisles and being in line and shopping carts, and limiting the number of people that are allowed to be in the store at any one time, those kinds of things. Hunger Mountain Co-op, for instance, has done a great job of putting all sorts of protocols in place. And I think it's been less happening at the regional grocery store level. I do get the sense that some of that is shifting, but that's another area of just concern of these stores need to do more. I did see it was a Vermont Digger article where a lot of the stores, the regional stores, they have orders in for PPEs, for masks, and they can't get them. So some of it is part of the supply chain challenge. you've got hundreds of employees at a larger grocery store. All of them need PPEs every day. You know, that's a
Yeah,
big challenge.
So, and I did hear a report from one of my constituents who had, for some reason, been up in Bradford, of all places. They did go to a Hannaford there where they had instituted one-way aisles, and that was not the case when I was last at the Brattleboro Hannaford. So,
It's changing quickly.
yeah. Sharon has her hand up. Sharon?
So looking at some of the modeling that they've done in when somebody in a grocery store coughs or sneezes, we've managed to avoid going to the grocery store for a number of weeks now because you're in this enclosed environment and those walls don't go all the way up to the ceiling. So if you're in the aisle next to the person who coughed or sneezed, you are contaminated. If they're not wearing a mask and their droplets aerosolize and are in the air. I think the open environment of an outdoor farmer's market is significantly safer if people are maintaining distances. Just saying.
Yeah, well, and that is one of the considerations, is to just not allow any indoor markets and only limit it to outdoor markets only.
Yeah, and which is what the Bennington market did. They had an outdoor curbside pickup. So, okay, John O'Brien has his hand up.
Yeah,
John?
just quickly, for the committee and Mike and Ellen, two things. One would be that if the administration could come up with guidelines across all food sellers, if it's indoor protocol, this is what you have to do, or at least try to do. And if it's outdoor, same thing. And the other would be that nutritionally, I find it sort of shame on the administration that they say that you can get all your nutritional needs met at Dollar General, but you can't at the Bennington Farmers Market. Seems appalling.
Yeah. I think one of our witnesses last time said, how is it right that a person can go to not to pinpoint, point the finger at Dollar General, but how is it right that a person can go to Dollar General and buy a Mountain Dew and they can't go to an outdoor farmers or a farmer's market? So anyway, Mike, did you want to tell us about the letter? Linda, were you able to put the letter up?
Not yet, still working on it, but I'll get it up while he's talking if you want.
Okay. Mike, did you want to talk to us a little bit?
Sure. So the letter is to the governor, Secretary Tebbetts, Commissioner Levine, and Commissioner Sherling. It says that Carolyn is writing on behalf of the committee to object to and request revision of the Agency of Agriculture's guidance that prohibits the operation of farmers markets during the governor's stay home, stay safe executive order. It then references that it's the committee's understanding that the Agency of Ag issued its guidance after consultation with the Department of Health and the Department of Public Safety. It then says the committee believes that the agency's guidance prohibiting operation of farmers markets is inequitable, conflicts with its own terms, does unnecessary economic harm, and removes an essential source of food and food assistance from the public at a critical time of need. It then goes to the next paragraph and summarizes the governor's stay home, stay safe order and the basis for it, how it was issued to reduce the spread of COVID-19 and avoid needless illness and deaths while ensuring the continuity of functions critical to public health, safety, and economic security. The order mandates Vermonters stay at home and leave home only for essential reasons. Among the essential reasons a person may leave home are to shop for groceries, pick up goods, curbside, and obtain meals or beverages. The Agency of Commerce's guidance to businesses for the order provides that businesses that provide essential services, including food distribution, may continue to operate. It then says farmers markets unquestionably provide essential services As the Agency of Agriculture's guidance itself clearly states, farmers markets provide food to Vermonters. Markets also provide prepared meals, beverages, and other goods. In addition, farmers markets serve as a necessary source of food for persons participating in food assistance programs such as 3 Squares Vermont. To the committee and to the average Vermonter, farmers markets clearly are more than essential. They are necessary services that should be exempt from the stay home, stay safe order. Yet despite providing these vital services, the state is prohibiting farmers markets from operating. What exasperates the committee is that the stay home, stay safe order is inequitably applied to farmers markets. The state is allowing grocery stores, hardware stores, liquor stores, and big box stores to operate because those stores allegedly provide essential goods and services, while farmers market supposedly does not. Many of these exempt stores are operating without significant social distancing measures, whereas farmers markets have volunteered to implement social distancing, remote ordering, and curbside pickup. Why can a person buy a television from a publicly accessible Walmart but cannot remotely order spinach and pick it up curbside from a local farmer's market? We see no basis for this inequity. In addition, the Agency of Agriculture guidance advises farmers to do exactly what farmers markets have proposed. Namely, the agency's guidance provides that farmers can and should sell food through farm stands with appropriate social distancing, online food sales, phone orders, curbside pickup, and delivery. Farmers markets offer to implement these exact measures, but the Agency of Agriculture still is prohibiting their operation in direct conflict with its own guidance. These are extraordinary times. People are anxious, unemployment is high, and the economy is suffering. The committee understands that the state must take unprecedented action to protect public health and safety. However, prohibiting the operation of farmers markets entirely was unnecessary, contributes to unemployment, and further harms the state's economy. Farmers markets can operate subject to reasonable measures to protect public health and safety. The committee requests that the state reverse the policy prohibiting the operation of farmers markets and allow the markets to operate subject to appropriate social distancing measures. Such a decision would provide an essential service, protect public health, eliminate inequitable treatment, and avoid additional negative economic impacts on farmers and the state as a whole. In addition, the operation of farmers markets with social distancing conditions could provide a signal of a return to relative normalcy and comfort that all Vermonters currently would appreciate. Please reverse the Agency of Agriculture policy as quickly as possible. Feel free to contact me if you need additional information or have questions. And then it's signed by Carolyn.
Sounds good. Sounds comprehensive. Thoughts from committee members? I see a thumbs up from John O'Brien. John? Thumbs up from Sharon. Sharon's having problems with her internet, so she's gone off video. John, I see a thumbs up from Tom and Terry. John O'Brien has his hand up. John?
Carolyn, if the committee agrees on this and you sign it, is this the sort of thing we could get into the papers as an op-ed? It's just
We could, but I will tell you that I think that I would rather send it and see if we can get a reaction and response from the agency before that would be kind of a nuclear option, and I'd rather not do that.
okay.
If we can avoid it. Ellen, do you want to, I see Vicky has her hand up, but I want to call on Ellen because she might have a thought about this.
I'm just wondering, Mike, about the reference to asking the agency to reverse its decision. But my understanding is that this is from the governor and Dr. Levine, and that the agency has been advocating for this. So I'm wondering if the letter should really be to get the governor to reverse his course.
The actual guidance is from Secretary Tebbetts. It's signed by Anson. I agree that it was probably dictated by the governor and Commissioner Levine, but Anson's the one that actually signed the guidance document.
Okay. Vicky's hand is up. and Sharon's hand is up. Vicky?
Yeah, Michael, thank you for crafting that letter. And I just had a couple comments. One is Ellen had said earlier that this whole situation's fluid anyway, and maybe even now as we speak is they're really diving in. I think they really are to make this happen. So I just didn't want to step on their toes too much, but to say, you know, we really are concerned as we are. So it's just my little bit of caution inside of me that just says they really are trying, and we want to encourage that and say thank you. I don't know. But in the meantime, there was just one reference to televisions. I missed it, Mike. Did you say people can buy them now? Because I don't think they can at box stores, but I'm sorry, I didn't
they
hear
can.
it correctly.
I believe you can still buy appliances at,
Can?
yeah.
Oh, because I know people have tried to get even phone cards and phones and they can't. But
Well,
they can get
I can double check that, and I can change that sentence and say why can people access, you know, go to Walmart to buy food and not go to, if that would be more preferable.
So
I think that's
I'll
good.
interject here that I was in a Walmart when I did my massive trip down to town. I needed some sewing notions, and unfortunately, Walmart is my best option other than going to Keene, where I would shop at Joann's, so another multinational basically. But when I was in Walmart, you could go anywhere in the store and buy anything you wanted. So that, granted, that was in Hinsdale, New Hampshire. I don't know if there are different standards for Vermont Walmarts, but
There
boy,
is.
what's that?
There is, as far as I know, there's aisles blocked off, a lot of aisles blocked off. You can't even go down them.
Okay, so a bunch of hands are up. Sharon is first, and then John O'Brien, and then John Bartholomew.
Thank you. So first, I know that I have been hearing from people who are frustrated because they cannot buy seeds at their Walmart because the gardening section has been closed off in St. Albans. So I think Vermont Walmarts are not, the New Hampshire Walmart situation does not reflect what's going on here. But my internet was pretty bad. And so some of what Mike O'Grady was saying sounded a little bit like a robot being tortured. And I want to check to see if he mentioned anything about the fact that often the food at farmers markets is fresher and therefore has a significantly higher nutritional value. I mean, and nobody's buying stinking Doritos at the farmer's market. They're buying real food. And I think that that's an important piece of this.
Mike, do you have a response to that?
I didn't include that, but I can.
And I'm not, you know, it doesn't have to be in there for me to be happy, but I think that is an important piece that people are often ignorant of.
Well, I would just say, you know, I appreciate that. And if you're talking about lettuce, yes. But if you're talking about root crops, that they might have been in storage equally long, but let's not get technical.
Sure. And we just pulled our parsnips out of the ground. So yeah.
Right. John O'Brien.
Oh, I was just gonna say you could still buy a gallon of Captain Morgan, but you can't buy a dozen eggs at a farmer's market. That's kind of amazing.
All right, John Bartholomew.
What's wrong with Doritos? No, I was just gonna say, I think the bit about the TV is, if it's accurate, is pretty powerful, but if it's not accurate, then we need to change it.
We can include the Captain Morgans. All right, any other, John, is your hand up again, or did you just not lower it? Okay. Thanks. All right, any other thoughts about the letter? Vicky? Vicky, you got to unmute yourself.
What is Captain Morgan's?
Jeez.
It's
Is it
rum.
beer, liquor? What is that?
Yeah, it's a
Someday I'll tell you a great story when we're together about my husband and Captain Morgan's one Christmas. But that's not for now, or YouTube live streaming. Yeah, it's a spiced rum, Vicky. Okay. Any other questions or thoughts about the letter? It's
Linda
on
has
the
it online
website.
right now for you to review, and the editors are currently editing it because I
Okay.
didn't finish it until this morning.
Okay.
So if you want to make revisions, just let me know. I'll change the Walmart TV reference. I'll
Okay.
work in a concept about provide fresher food or more nutritious food.
Okay. And
I will add in a sentence or a reference to we appreciate the difficulty of what you're doing and appreciate your efforts, but we will still ask for a change. It's something along those lines.
and Mike, you may have included this, but I think you did, but just to be really clear, what I think we would like is for the agency or the administration or the Department of Health to set up some very clear guidelines as to what represented good protocol. And I think you did that, but maybe if you could stress that.
It could be clear.
We're not trying to throw our weight around here. Well, yeah, we are a little, but we're just, maybe we're being Ma Grizzly Bear about the farmers markets, but for me, it just doesn't make sense where we are at this point. And given that we could probably fairly soon move outdoors, and that Bennington already proved that by doing it, that we should be able to have farmers markets. I see Terry's hand is up. Terry?
I believe when I was listening to the governor, I think he mentioned that, he has the May 15th deadline, but he mentioned farmers markets and the fact that he would be reevaluating almost daily things similar to the farmers market. So it's obviously it's on his mind, and somebody's got it on the table in front of him.
Yeah, good. Maybe this letter will help move that, that idea forward a little bit. Ellen, do you have any idea when the drop dead date is for farmers markets to be profitable?
No, because everyone is different, on the call that happened last week with all the farmers markets that NOFA had as sort of an emergency call last Friday. I sat in on that, and some folks, they normally don't even open until the end of May. Some of the smaller markets, and others, like Burlington, she was saying that by May 1st they need to know. So it's a whole range.
Yeah. I think also another detail that indicates to me a lack of understanding is the notion that farm stands and CSAs, farm stores and stands and CSAs are allowed. So, why don't farmers just do that? But setting up a farm store or stand or a CSA takes a lot of organization, and it's not something you can just sort of pull out of a hat. So I find that extremely frustrating. Anyway, any other ideas about the letter? Mike, I think you did a fantastic job. And then maybe when you finish this, if you can send it to Linda and she'll put it out to us on the website, we can give our approval is it legal to do it offline? Just have people give us a thumbs up regarding the changes?
Well, why don't you conditionally approve it now?
Okay,
Depending on the chair's input the chair receives once the draft is posted.
okay. Is that all right with all of you? Thumbs up? Okay, I'm seeing a nodding of heads. Yep, thumbs up. Rodney and Tom? Thumbs up from Tom, Vicky, Sharon. Rodney, are you okay with that?
I'm not sure.
No? How do you think we should change it?
I don't know. I don't know.
Okay,
I just think that maybe it's a little too stern in some areas that, even the governor hasn't been through this before and could be allowed to not understand some stuff. And I think some of this language in this letter kind of points to him not knowing what he's doing. And I just think it's, I don't know, having a hard time supporting it.
okay, I appreciate that. I'm hoping that that's not what it says. It just seems like we've gone back and forth about it. And in our meeting a week and a half ago on Friday, Anson did respond to the Bennington Farmers Market by saying that he thought that they were meeting the protocol, and so it's just disappointing that that got reversed after they had worked so hard on that. Any other thoughts about it? I've seen Jeff, I think Rodney is the only one so far who has felt not good about it. Sharon, your hand is up.
If the language was softened a little bit, I would not have a problem with that. I will support it either way. I do hear Rodney's concern, but so either way, I'm supportive, and I don't think it would lose anything if the tone was softened. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, Vicky's hand is up. Vicky?
I think what my comment was before when I referred to the fact that Ellen had said it is fluid and they're working on this as they go. That was my feeling of, I didn't want to come across too hard because, wow, like Rodney said, there's a whole lot to think about. And so somehow with our enthusiasm about getting markets going again, just realizing how hard this is for everybody, and just try to show support for farmers markets without being too maybe harsh or demanding, I should say. I don't know.
Okay, thanks, Vicky. So maybe we soften the language a little bit, or are folks okay with that? Rodney?
So I just gotta say, I only have one device, so I can't read the letter while I'm on Zoom. And maybe when I do read the letter, I'll have, comments to make. I just, in listening to it being read, I kind of, some areas concern me.
Okay, so do we want to do sort of a provisional approval of the letter, and then it can be sent out to Linda, it can go online. You all can, maybe we can get it directly. I don't know if that's breaking the open meeting law or not, but putting it up on our website at the same time we're getting a chance to see it. And I'll make a judgment about whether I think that the tone has gotten a little bit softer. Does that sound good to committee members? Okay, I see a thumbs up from Vicky, John, Sharon, Tom. Thumbs up from John O'Brien and Terry. Okay. All right, well, why don't we proceed that way? Thumbs up from Rodney. And maybe I'll check in with you individually as we, just to make sure. What I think most important is probably checking in with Rodney. So he gets a chance to read the letter as it is. Mike's going to make a few little changes. And yeah, I don't think we're trying to be too harsh, but I think this is pretty important to our farming community that they have an opportunity. Granted, we want remote ordering, we want curbside pickup, which I think goes way above and beyond the strictures that are being applied to people, the Dollar Generals and other grocery stores. So, anyway, I think it's pretty important. Okay, so we're over time. I wondered if we were going to fill this 2 hours, and we did it very well. John O'Brien's hand is up, and John Bartholomew. John O'Brien first.
Oh, just before Ellen left, I was thinking, and this has probably been done, Ellen, but if you wanted to get together with NOFA and give either the Agency of Ag or the people in the governor's office who make this decision, right here, 3 or 10 farmers markets that are operating with these protocols, or here's the South Royalton the South Royalton market, or Hunger Mountain, who are doing just this. And so if farmers markets can follow that exact through NOFA, those exact protocols, why are we stopping them? Because that goes back to that consistency question.
Yeah, just really quickly, I mean, NOFA really is the one that's taking the lead on this, and they have been collecting all this information and really been working with all the farmers markets because they support the Farmers Market Management Association. And so they're very aware of who's doing what and how, and they've put together a recommended protocol that would apply to all markets that was submitted to the agency. So all of that has already taken place. And yeah.
And that's why I'm mystified, like what the agency has pushed back.
It's not coming from the agency.
Or even higher up. It doesn't make sense to me, but.
I got the impression, John, that one of the problems was the fact that at this farmers market where they did meet indoors, they were spaced out. I mean, they weren't spaced out. Their booths were spaced out at a good distance, but they were all taking their own money, and that was of concern. So, in the case of Bennington, there was one person taking the money. And I don't know how they divvied it up into the various farmers, but somehow they figured it out. And that's the kind of thing that might give the Department of Health a little bit more comfort. So,
right.
Okay, John Bartholomew, and then this will be our last thing, and then we really need to get offline.
I think it's really important for the governor to understand that when these rules are put into place, they need to make sense to people, or if they maybe don't make sense, then he's got to be able to explain them and justify them. I think the farmers markets come under this category. Obviously, everyone is extraordinarily inconvenienced by all of this, and most people, I believe, are willing to do what they need to comply. But if things start coming out that people just don't understand, that make no sense, then they're going to stop complying. This is really important. One example, I had a contractor call me, a carpenter, who's questioning, why can't he go and work in a house that's empty? Or if he gets a job to repair a deck outside of a house, why is that being stopped? And this is the exact same kind of question. If it doesn't make sense to people, they're going to stop complying. And that I think we need to somehow convey that to the governor, that this falls under that kind of category. It's got to make sense, or people aren't going to do it. They're not going to follow the rules.
Okay. Thanks, John. All right, so we're going to wrap this up. Ellen, I want to thank you sincerely for part of this. Mike O'Grady, thank you as always. We couldn't do it without you. And Linda, thank you. So we're going to wrap this up, and we will be meeting on Friday. Oh, by the way, if Maddie Kempner is watching, by the way, I think she probably is, if she could share with me the protocol that was laid out by NOFA, I'd appreciate seeing that. And so we are going to wrap up this meeting of House Agriculture and Forestry. for the day, and we'll see you on Friday at 9:30. Thanks so much.